Loretta Lynn's daughter has finally spoken, and what she revealed about her mother's bond with Conway Twitty has stunned fans. For decades, whispers swirled around their duets, their glances, and the fire in their songs. But the truth, carried quietly by Loretta herself, was far more powerful than rumor. From the moment they first sang together, something unshakable formed between them. Their voices weren't just blending, they were colliding with a force that felt lived in, intimate, undeniable. Audiences saw it, the press hinted at it, but Loretta and Conway kept their secret close. Now, through her daughter's words, that silence has been broken. Were they more than partners? Was it love, loyalty, or something even deeper? After years of mystery, the truth behind country music's most talked about duo is finally being revealed. In the early 1970s, Loretta Lynn stood at the height of her power. Already crowned the coal miner's daughter, she had become the voice of working-class women, someone who translated her hard childhood and stormy marriage into songs that felt like confessions. Her audience wasn't just large, it was fiercely loyal, drawn to the honesty in every lyric. By that time, Loretta was not just another country singer, she was the queen of Nashville, the one artists measured themselves against. Conway Twitty entered this world from a different road. He had chased rock and roll stardom in the 50s, scoring a massive hit with It's Only Make-Believe. But fame in that lane was fickle, and by the mid-60s, Conway saw the writing on the wall. He pivoted into country, and what many thought was a desperate gamble turned into a reinvention. His voice, smoother and lower than most, carried a natural intimacy that fit country storytelling perfectly. By the 70s, he was climbing the charts steadily, proving himself not as a crossover act, but as a country force in his own right. Their paths crossed when the Nashville establishment was hungry for new duets. The golden age of pairings, George Jones and Tammy Wynette, Porter Wagoner and Dolly Parton, had shown that audiences wanted not just singers but characters who could embody the love, heartbreak, and temptation written into country's DNA. For Loretta and Conway, the pairing was meant to be professional, another studio experiment to satisfy the demand. But the moment they stepped into the booth together, everyone in that room felt it. It wasn't just harmony, it was collision, two voices that seemed built to find each other, as though all of Conway's cool restraint had been waiting for Loretta's fire to strike against. Their first songs together didn't just land on the charts, they shot up with a velocity that stunned even the label executives. Audiences couldn't get enough, because the chemistry wasn't polished, it was real. The truth was, both carried backgrounds that made them uniquely suited to connect. Loretta had grown up dirt poor in the Kentucky hills, married young, and fought her way into Nashville with no industry handouts. Conway, born in Mississippi, came from working-class struggle too, and knew what it meant to fight for reinvention. They weren't glossy stars handed fame. They were survivors who had clawed their way to the spotlight. That history bled into every note they sang together. When After the Fire Is Gone hit in 1971, it won them a Grammy. But more than that, it set the tone for everything that followed. Loretta and Conway weren't just making hits, they were telling stories that felt like they belonged to them personally. Fans leaned closer, wondering, were these songs confessions? Were they glimpses into something more than music? The partnership had only just begun, but already it was stirring questions no one could answer. By the early 1970s, it was clear Loretta Lynn and Conway Twitty weren't just another studio experiment. They were lightning in a bottle, a duo that elevated every song they touched. When After the Fire Is Gone swept through the charts and won them a Grammy, it sent a message across Nashville: something extraordinary had been born. This wasn't luck, it was the start of a partnership that would change the fabric of country music. The hits kept coming. Lead Me On, with its aching plea for forbidden love, sounded almost too convincing to be fiction. Louisiana Woman, Mississippi Man played like a joyful sparring match between two people who knew exactly how to tease and challenge each other. Feelings carried an intimacy that pushed the boundary of what country duets usually dared to say. Each record layered on the intrigue, creating a catalog that didn't just chart well but left fans analyzing every lyric for hidden meaning. Their chemistry was unlike anything else on stage. Loretta brought a fiery sharpness, her voice cutting through with grit and emotion. Conway answered with a silky baritone that steadied the storm. Together they created balance, a give and take that felt lived in, as though they weren't playing characters but speaking to each other directly. In an era when duets often leaned on spectacle, Loretta and Conway's performances were startlingly natural. They didn't need theatrics, because every glance, every smile, every lingering pause carried weight. Audiences noticed. Concerts featuring the two became headline events, with fans lining up not just to hear the songs, but to witness the dynamic between them. Women in the audience often saw Loretta as one of their own, strong, outspoken, but vulnerable in her longing. And Conway became the man they trusted to match her strength. Men admired Conway's easy confidence, yet envied the way Loretta lit up when she sang beside him. No matter which angle you saw it from, the pair radiated something magnetic. The press fueled the fire. Writers described their on-stage partnership as too real, too close, or dangerously convincing. Photographs captured the way they leaned into each other during performances, eyes locked, seemingly oblivious to the crowd. Every article hinted at what no one could prove, that their bond went beyond music. Loretta and Conway never denied the rumors outright, but they never confirmed them either. The silence only deepened the fascination. Behind the scenes, record executives couldn't have been happier. Together, Loretta and Conway became a guaranteed success story. Their duets consistently hit the charts, and each tour stop packed houses across the country. They weren't just singers anymore. They were a cultural phenomenon embodying the romance and heartbreak that country music was built on. By the end of the decade, Loretta and Conway had created one of the most celebrated duet partnerships in history. Yet the more songs they sang, the more fans asked themselves the same question: were they simply masters of their craft, or were they telling their own story through the music? As Loretta and Conway's duets dominated the charts, whispers swirled louder with each release. Their voices didn't just blend, they entwined, creating a sound so intimate that many fans were convinced it had to come from something deeper than performance. Songs like Lead Me On and Feelin's didn't read like crafted studio pieces, they read like confessions. It didn't take long before rumors of a secret romance overshadowed the music itself. Loretta's marriage to Doolittle Mooney Lynn had long been a stormy subject. She never hid the reality of her difficult home life, often singing about it with brutal honesty. Fans couldn't help but connect those truths with the fire she seemed to share with Conway on stage. Was she singing to her husband, or to Conway? The speculation wasn't helped by Conway's own reputation. He had always carried an air of mystery, the kind of presence that made it easy to project untold stories onto him. Together, the combination was explosive. The press seized on every glance, every smile, every lingering pause in a performance. Headlines hinted at what they could never confirm. Photographs of the two in rehearsals or backstage carried more weight than their interviews. And yet, when asked directly, Loretta and Conway always kept their answers safe. They praised each other. They spoke of friendship, of respect, of artistry. But they never gave anyone the satisfaction of a clear denial. That silence only deepened the intrigue. Behind closed doors, the speculation came at a cost. Loretta's family often felt the strain of the constant attention, watching as tabloids twisted narratives to suggest betrayals that weren't so simple. Even years later, her daughter would acknowledge that the public fascination was inescapable. Fans looked at those duets not as staged performances but as glimpses into a truth Loretta and Conway chose not to spell out. For the family, it was clear that this bond couldn't be explained in headlines. It belonged to Loretta and Conway alone. And yet, the ambiguity also worked in their favor. Every new song, every televised performance, became an event precisely because of the mystery. Audiences leaned in closer, listening for clues. Was that lingering touch rehearsed? Was that smile spontaneous? No other duo carried that same sense of danger, of possibility, just under the surface. The rumors, though stressful, helped secure their place as the most compelling pair in country music. For Loretta and Conway, silence became their shield. They never confirmed, never denied, and never broke the spell. In an industry built on image, they chose mystery, and it kept the world talking for decades. Away from the stage lights and the screaming fans, Loretta and Conway shared a different kind of bond, one that was less about spectacle and more about survival. Life on the road was grueling, a cycle of endless tours, long bus rides, and nights spent in hotel rooms far from home. For many artists, the spotlight was glamorous, but Loretta knew the truth. Fame could be isolating, even crushing. Conway understood that in a way few others did, and in him Loretta found a confidant who spoke her language. Their friendship grew strongest in the quiet moments. Between shows, Loretta would vent about the pressures of balancing her career with her family back home, while Conway admitted the struggles of maintaining stability in a business that never slowed down. Both came from working-class roots, both had fought for every inch of success, and both carried scars from those battles. That shared background gave them an unspoken trust. They didn't have to explain themselves to each other. They simply understood. Conway became more than just a duet partner. To Loretta's children, he was a familiar face, someone who was around often enough to feel like part of the family circle. They remembered how naturally he fit into gatherings, how Loretta seemed lighter when Conway was nearby. For the daughter who later spoke out, those moments left an impression that lingered. Conway wasn't just a figure from the stage. He was present, steady, a constant presence in her mother's life. That closeness was reflected in how protective they were of each other. When Loretta faced criticism for pushing the boundaries of what women in country music were allowed to say, Conway stood firmly in her corner. When Conway faced doubts about his shift from rock to country, Loretta treated him not as an outsider but as a true equal. Their bond was built not only on music but on loyalty, a rare commodity in an industry where alliances often dissolved as quickly as they formed. The duo's inner circle noticed the same thing fans did when Loretta and Conway shared a stage. It felt different. It wasn't the calculated partnership of two professionals. It was alive, unpredictable, sometimes tender, sometimes fiery, but always real. The way Loretta leaned into him, the way Conway steadied her presence, it mirrored the trust they carried behind closed doors. For Loretta, who had endured a volatile marriage, Conway represented something steadier. He was the partner who never raised his voice at her, the friend who listened without judgment, the man who treated her not as an extension of his career but as an equal. It's no wonder that, decades later, her daughter would look back and say that Conway was more than a colleague to Loretta. He was family in every way that mattered. By the late 1970s and into the 80s, the pace that once fueled Loretta and Conway's success began to show its cracks. Their duets had become staples of country music, their tours were still in high demand, and the chemistry remained undeniable. But behind the scenes, subtle shifts were beginning. Where once they seemed inseparable, slowly, their paths began to diverge. Part of the strain came from sheer exhaustion. Loretta had been recording and touring at a relentless pace for more than 2 decades. Between her role as Nashville's reigning queen and her obligations as a wife and mother, the weight on her shoulders was immense. Conway, too, was feeling the pressure. His solo career demanded more of his time, and he began to focus heavily on maintaining his own image as a country star. The days when they could devote themselves equally to duet projects grew fewer and farther between. Creative disagreements also played their part. The choice of songs, the direction of their tours, even how much they should lean into their public image as a pair, became points of tension. Loretta wanted to stay true to her roots, while Conway often looked towards smoother, more polished material that could broaden his appeal. Neither was wrong, but their visions didn't always align. For a duo built on harmony, those differences created small rifts that grew larger over time. For fans, the changes were subtle at first. A missed collaboration here, a solo tour there, but for Loretta's family, the shift was clear. They remembered how present Conway had once been at gatherings, during rehearsals, in the day-to-day rhythms of Loretta's career. As the 80s wore on, those moments became fewer. Loretta's daughter later reflected on that distance, noting that her mother never spoke bitterly of Conway, but the absence was felt all the same. Even when they weren't performing together regularly, the public refused to let go of the image of Loretta and Conway as an inseparable duo. Fans continued to ask about them, and every reunion on stage felt like an event. That pressure sometimes made the distance even harder, as if they were expected to perform not just songs but a bond that had grown more complicated with time. Still, the connection never disappeared completely. Whenever Loretta and Conway did reunite, whether in the studio or on a television special, the spark reignited instantly. It was as if no time had passed, as though the years of distance melted away in the span of a verse. Those brief reunions reminded everyone, including Loretta's family, of what made the partnership so unique. Even as life pulled them in different directions, the foundation remained. But the truth was undeniable. The golden era of Loretta and Conway, as a constant presence in each other's careers, was fading. The distance wasn't dramatic, nor was it fueled by anger. It was the quiet drift of two lives weighed down by success, family, and the unstoppable march of time. In the summer of 1993, country music was shaken by news no one saw coming. Conway Twitty, just 59 years old, had collapsed suddenly while on tour. Hours later, he was gone. For a man who had seemed so steady, so enduring, the shock was devastating. Fans across the world grieved, stunned that a voice they had always expected to hear was silenced overnight. For Loretta Lynn, the loss cut far deeper than the public ever realized. Conway wasn't just a duet partner, he was one of the most important presences in her life. When the news reached her, friends recalled how visibly shaken she was, struggling to process the reality that the man who had stood by her side through so many of her most defining moments was no longer there. She had weathered storms before, family troubles, industry pressures, personal health battles, but this was different. This was the sudden absence of someone who had been her anchor, her balance, her counterpart. Publicly, Loretta said little. At memorials, her grief was clear, but she kept her words guarded. It was as if she wanted to protect what they had shared, to keep it from being consumed by headlines or turned into spectacle. Fans noticed the difference. For an artist who had built her career on raw honesty, her silence about Conway spoke volumes. It wasn't denial, it was reverence. Her family, too, remembered that silence. Her daughter later reflected on how Loretta rarely brought Conway's name into conversations, almost as if saying it would reopen a wound that never healed. But in private, the reminders were everywhere. Old photographs, vinyl covers stacked neatly, songs that she couldn't bring herself to play. Each one carried the weight of a bond that had been cut short too soon. For the family, it was clear that Conway wasn't simply a memory in Loretta's career. He was woven into her heart in a way she rarely allowed the outside world to see. Fans, meanwhile, began revisiting the duets with new eyes. Songs once enjoyed for their passion now sounded like premonitions. After the Fire Is Gone suddenly carried a haunting sense of finality. Lead Me On became less about temptation and more about devotion unfulfilled. Every lyric took on new meaning, reshaped by Conway's absence. The world realized that those performances weren't just art, they were echoes of something deeply personal. In the years that followed, Loretta's stage presence shifted. She still performed with fire, still carried the crown of country music, but there was a weight in her delivery that hadn't been there before. The sparkle she once shared in playful exchanges with Conway was gone, replaced by something quieter, more reflective. Audiences felt it, even if they couldn't explain it. The silence he left behind was as much a part of her music as the songs themselves. For Loretta, Conway's passing wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the closing of a bond she had never fully defined for the world, and now never could. The mystery, the loyalty, the trust, they would remain hers to keep until the very end. Decades after the world first fell in love with Loretta Lynn and Conway Twitty's music, the questions still lingered. Were they more than duet partners? Was the chemistry on stage simply the product of talent, or was it rooted in something unspoken between them? Loretta herself never answered. She chose silence, guarding that part of her life as carefully as she guarded her family. But silence too tells a story, and in the end it was her daughter who gave fans a glimpse into the truth. In interviews reflecting on her mother's life, Loretta's daughter made it clear that Conway's place was not simply professional. He wasn't just the man who stood beside her in the studio or on stage. He was a presence in her family, a constant figure who carried the kind of trust Loretta didn't give easily. To her, Conway was like family, not because of rumor or scandal, but because of the unwavering bond her mother shared with him. It was a truth that Loretta herself may have been too private, too protective, to ever say aloud. For fans, that revelation reframed everything. The glances, the smiles, the haunting power of songs like Lead Me On and Feelings, they were not simply performances. They were reflections of a relationship that defied simple categories. Not quite romance, not quite friendship, but something deeper, a partnership bound by loyalty, trust and love in its own quiet form. It was a connection that outlasted marriages, outlasted industry contracts, and even outlasted life itself. Loretta's daughter's words gave closure to what so many had speculated about for years. There was no scandal to uncover, no hidden betrayal to expose. Instead, the truth was far more human. Loretta and Conway were two people who found in each other a refuge, an anchor, a shared space of understanding that only they could define. It wasn't the kind of story that fit neatly into headlines, which is why Loretta never told it herself. But through her daughter, that truth finally had a voice. Looking back now, their legacy feels even more profound. The duets remain timeless, not because they hinted at gossip, but because they captured something universal, what it means to find someone who steadies you in the chaos of life. Loretta's silence preserved that bond, but her daughter's reflection allows fans to see it for what it really was. In the end, Loretta and Conway gave country music more than just unforgettable songs. They gave it a story of connection, loyalty, and love that could not be defined, only felt. And now, thanks to her daughter, the world finally understands why Loretta guarded that bond so fiercely. It wasn't meant for gossip, it was meant to be remembered with respect. For more emotional stories, check out this video.